All right, hey guys, it's Miss Summers with your notes today. Today is November 30th, and today we are looking at human impact with regards to agriculture. So, before the break, we talked about human population and the fact that human population is overall increasing around the world. There's some places where it's growing rapidly and other places where it's not growing or shrinking, but overall, there's more people on Earth than there ever have been. All right. And then we also talked about urbanization. All those people have to live somewhere. So we looked at how urbanization affects the environment. And then we looked at energy sources because people need energy to do stuff like electricity, heat. All right. And we looked at different ways that people obtain energy sources. So today we're looking at land use in terms of agriculture and harvesting. All right. How do these processes affect the environment and how we can change our practices so that we're having less of an impact. All right, so let's start by looking at traditional agriculture, what it's used for, why we love it, and then what it does to the environment. All right, so agriculture is a fancy way of saying farming. It is the cultivation of animals, plants, and other life to make food and other products. Okay, so farming is food. All right, so it's a necessary process. We definitely need this in order to survive. If you look at the beginnings of human civilization, when we went from being more of a hunter-gatherer type species where we followed our food around and we hunted it and we picked things up off the ground out of nature versus civilizations like where we lived in like cities and towns and had governments and stuff like that. The cornerstone is agriculture. All these civilizations, like the Egyptians and the Aztecs, and in Mesopotamia and the cradle of civilization, they all figured out how to grow their own food. All right, so it's a very human thing. It's super cool. All right, so agriculture, we need to make food. Agriculture is also very important in terms of economy. In North Carolina, especially, 1 out of 5 people in the U.S. are going to work in the agriculture sector in some form or fashion. Okay, maybe they're seasonal workers and they harvest things. Maybe they run like a dairy farm like this. They process food. They do something. As population increases, this demand for agriculture is also going to increase because the more people you have, the more food you need. That just makes sense. All right, but unfortunately, the way we've been doing agriculture can be really hard on the environment. All right. So why do we use agriculture land? We already kind of talked on this. Until humans learned to farm, they were nomadic. Okay, they were hunter-gatherers. They followed their food. Okay, so the food told you where you were going to live for that season. All right. So agriculture is really helpful if we're trying to live in towns and cities because it gives us a stable food source. Okay, like plant material, meats, and animal feed. That would be plants for animals that we're then going to eat. Economic gain. All right, so we're making money. And non-edible resources. So not everything that we grow goes to our plates. Some non-edible resources that we have a lot of. Cotton is a big one here in the southern states. Ethanol, that is a fuel source. So you might have heard it called biofuel. It's made out of corn. All right, that's an alternative energy source. So let's look at some traditional techniques and why they're not the most fabulous. All right, so we have five traditional agriculture techniques that humans have been using throughout history that are not necessarily the best. All right, the first one is called slash and burn. All right, when you slash and burn, you cut and burn all the plants in an area to create a field. So it's an easy way to get rid of stuff you're not using to make room for other stuff. So it's very time efficient, but you're getting rid of all those native plants. Same with clear cutting. Clear cutting is similar. Cutting down everything uniformly, so you're not leaving any trees or any native plant life to make room for other plants. Tillage, you might do this if you have like a front yard or a backyard and you want to plant like grass seed, you might do this. When you till, you dig or stir or overturn the topsoil. That loosens up the soil so that seeds can take hold. But when you do that, you're going to increase the rate of soil erosion because the soil is now loose. Monoculture, so mono means one. In a monoculture, you grow a single crop or species over a wide area over many years. So imagine if you lived out in like Kansas or whatever and you grew corn and your parents grew corn and your grandparents grew corn and your great-grandparents grew corn on the family farm. Every year you grow corn because that's what you're good at. The problem with monoculture is that it reduces the nutrients in the soil because the same nutrients gets taken out every single time. So eventually you run out. And then last we have fertilizer and pesticides. Fertilizers are useful in making plants grow faster, which again is nice because we need more food because there's more people. So farmers are pressured to produce more. So fertilizers help them do that. And pesticides and herbicides keep bugs and weeds from killing their own crops. So again, it's increasing how much food they're able to produce. Both fertilizers and pesticides can cause water pollution. All right. So here's some other, I already kind of talked about some of these. Soil erosion, deforestation. Those are possible effects from those traditional techniques. We're going to look at these other effects here right now. All right. So these traditional practices can cause these things. All right. Firstly, soil erosion. Soil erosion is the biggest one. That's a big problem because all these other problems follow from it. Remember, erosion is the movement of sediments by wind, water, or gravity. When we take away plants like trees, grasses, whatever, that leaves the soil exposed, which means erosion increases. Whenever you take plants away, erosion increases. We also have deforestation, all right, which is going to be commonly go hand in hand with agriculture because agriculture, you need fields to grow stuff in, all right? So you're going to clear out areas of forest. Remember, removing plants, like we just said, removing plants increases erosion. But you also have a loss of habitats, which means less biodiversity, which is bad. You're going to have increased evaporation, leading to drought. And you're going to have more CO2 in the air because there's less photosynthesis going on. And remember, CO2 is one of those greenhouse gases that traps in heat. All right, that's a bad one. Overgrazing. So this happens when you have lots of animals on a relatively small piece of land. Okay. And they're constantly eating the grasses that are growing. Plants don't have enough time to grow back after they've been eaten, so they'll start to die off. Also, the soil compaction, okay, these animals weigh a lot. They can weigh, a ton or more. As they're pressing down on the soil gets packed tighter and tighter, so it reduces the porosity, and it reduces how well water can run into the soil. Okay, so you will have less infiltration and more runoff, which means flooding. All right. Desertification is what it sounds like. So we're up here now. During desertification, land becomes more desert-like. So how you know an area is becoming or is undergoing desertification, you will have less water and less plant life. This happens when you have overgrazing, all right, and it's already a dry area, all right. So by removing those plants, it's going to make it less dry, or make it more dry, I should say, more dry. All right. You'll have more evaporation, less water. It'll become more like a desert. And once it's a desert, you can't really grow anything in it. Okay. Our fifth impact is dryland salinity. Remember, salinity talks about salt. We talked about that with oceans. This happens. Remember, plants get their water through their roots. So whenever you grow like a big field of plants, all that water is being pulled up by the roots closer to the surface than it normally would be, which means you have more salt in the soil. And that can cause a loss of biodiversity. And lastly, our freshwater depletion. So we talked about this in our water unit. If you irrigate to an arid area, so somewhere that's dry, that water is going to go to the plants, but a lot of it's going to evaporate. And once it evaporates, it's not there anymore. Remember, we never change the amount of water on Earth, we just change where it is. All right, so this can cause your rivers to become smaller and smaller, kind of like the Colorado River. I think we talked about that briefly, where in some places it's totally dry because all that water has been diverted to other areas. So agriculture impacts the lithosphere, the soil, but it also impacts the atmosphere and hydrosphere. So it impacts the hydrosphere by the fertilizers and pesticides. All right. So fertilizers and pesticides, like if you look at like a can of Raid spray, it's like do not spray like near fish, don't spray near sources of water, stuff like that. Okay. If you put that on a field, what's going to happen when it rains? Some of that fertilizer or pesticides is going to wash off, and it's going to go down to the nearest water source, so a pond or a river or whatever. And it's going to contaminate it. All right, those toxins, those heavy metals, those poisons that are there to kill the pest are now going to kill other things. Fertilizers cause eutrophication. Remember, that's the process when fertilizers get in the water and it creates more algae, and then the algae all dies off, and you get that taking away the oxygen. Fertilizers will deplete the oxygen in the water, and once the oxygen's gone, you can't support life. All right? And the atmosphere, so we already talked about atmosphere in deforestation, how that increases CO2, but we also add other greenhouse gases through animals, so cattle farming specifically. Cows, not super great for the environment. Cattle farming is responsible for 18% of greenhouse gases that are emitted into the atmosphere, and it's mostly in the form of methane, which is a gas that cows produce when they digest their food. All right, so you have all these really negative impacts on the environment. So you're like, ooh, but I like eating. So what do I do? How can people do better? All right, because we need all these resources. You know, we need veggies, meats, feed, resources, you know, the economy gain. We can't just be like, okay, no more farming, because that would totally change society as we know it. But we also don't want these issues either. So how do we balance it? Well, the answer is you change how you practice agriculture. So agriculture itself is okay. We just got to change how we're doing it. So here's a couple of suggestions. These are ways that on large scales can help reduce the impact on the environment. Number one, crop rotation. So crop rotation is the opposite of monoculture. Remember, monoculture, you are growing one thing. In crop rotation, you rotate or switch what you plant every year. And that adds nutrients back to the soil. So the soil stays healthy. All right, so one year I grow corn. Well, corn takes out nitrogen from the soil. So the next year, instead of growing corn again, I'm going to grow soybeans because soybeans put nitrogen back in. All right? Soybeans are going to take another nutrient out. Well, the next year I'll plant something that puts that nutrient back in. All right? So you just got to do a little research and a little homework and figure out a good rotation that works. Usually if you have like 4 or 5, that's more than enough. Drip line irrigation saves water. So this is affecting the hydrosphere. Drip line irrigation is where you have little pipes that run alongside your plant, and instead of spraying water on it over the air or through the air, the water gets delivered right next to the plant root. So you don't need as much because less water gets lost to evaporation. It's more efficient. So I get more bang for my buck. All right. Keeping the proper number of animals on acreage, which is a fancy way of saying don't overcrowd your animals. Okay. So if you look at like commercial, like cattle farms and stuff where they're raising cows for food or whatnot, all right, and you see these pens and like the cows are super, super crowded and they don't have a lot of space, that's going to cause overgrazing. So if you let the animals spread out, okay, you don't overcrowd them, you're not going to get overgrazing. The plants are going to have enough time to grow back. And it's also a better practice for the animals themselves, okay? Even though they're, a food source, they're still living thingies, that feel stuff. Like they feel pain and discomfort and, whether or not they feel emotion is another story, but whatever. All right, it's better for the animal overall. Makes him happy. And lastly, reducing synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. If we can use these less, we won't get them in our water sources, and that reduces pollution, and that's a good thing for everyone. All right? So using, instead of synthetic fertilizers, all right, using natural means of promoting soil fertility, like composting. Instead of using pesticides like chemicals to get rid of bugs, introducing a native predator. Okay, so if you have like a mouse problem, instead of putting rat poison everywhere, you could build owl boxes where little owls can make their nests, and then the owls eat the mice. Happy for everybody, except the mice. All right, so that was a very quick review over agriculture. All right, make sure you go back and look at those traditional practices, how they harm the environment, and then how we can make it better.